Hello there. My name is Ian Stevens, and today I'm presenting my research on responsive deep brain stimulation as it applies to personalized medicine. If you'd like to follow along to this video, you can watch the poster as they both contain the same content. And for my research over the past few years, I've been particularly interested in trying to understand how these deep brain stimulation devices that are used to treat conditions like epilepsy, they're also called responsive neurostimulation, so RNS or closed loop DBS, how they are progressing and being used in a personalized fashion. And in a brief summary, in figure 1 you can see a device, a responsive neural stimulation device, where the components are comprised of a generator, software that is an algorithm, as well as an electrocardiography or ECOG, as well as a lead. These components work together to both detect neural activity and then stimulate it in a particular fashion to hopefully, in the case of epilepsy, to prohibit the propagation of the seizure that could be occurring. Now, in particular, with these device placements, with their parameters, and with the algorithm, each of those components can be personalized and per person, per location, per site, generally speaking, in particular with the different pathologies. And I found this parallel interesting in comparison to sort of neuro-oncology and oncology, broadly speaking, because they're highly personalized characteristics, yet they're still being researched in the randomized controlled trial sort of characteristic. And I wanted to better understand if this was a preference and if this was done on purpose. As well, this is my abstract. If you'd like to pause to read that, feel free to get a summary. So in order to better understand these details, what I did was I thought about looking at countries' regulatory policies regarding these medical devices and sort of trying to read through them, quantify and qualify majoritively how it is the standards for safety are created and assessed. Now, instead of doing an exhaustive study, a comprehensive study was used by support of Harmsen et al.'s publication entitled Clinical Trials for Deep Brain Stimulation, Current State of Affairs. Table 1 currently shows a chunk of their Table 3. And these 5 countries, their national policies were analyzed, in addition to Australia, for their regulatory policies, the regulatory departments broadly, and the characteristics that they were described as, going through their various sites and legislation, I should say. The terms of psychological, qualitative, personal, subjective, experience, and phenomenological were prioritized, but also words such as risk, harm, data, study, quantitative, and subject were also looked for to try and maybe get some interesting content that is pertinent but not necessarily explicit. Overall, a summary of the results can be seen in Figure 2, where the organization's regulatory pathways and policies found are identified and labeled. And the European Union in particular has both Germany and France. And while they're not perfectly similar, they do have, they both accept the European conformity standard, and thus they're considered one in terms of this research and regulatory procedures overall. I'd like to draw attention to the main notable quotes and results in the left-hand column, in particular the first two from both the European Union and Australia, where explicit reference to qualitative measures is made. And this holds true for the results overall, in that these two countries were best at emphasizing sort of the use of qualitative research, while the remainder of other countries either said it more implicitly or it was said not at all, and instead quantitative measures were prioritized. So these were the general brief summary of findings. In terms of limitations for the research, this was a comprehensive sort of priority and majority assessment, the 80%, quote unquote, and not an exhaustive examination of every country and every regulatory procedure of medical devices. It could be explored to see if there's any nuance in the remaining 20%, or maybe the other countries are actually very in favor of qualitative assessments. I'm unsure, but that could also be analyzed. Another major limitation is that both the Chinese, French, and German documentation were not translated by a third party. Instead, both Word Doc and Google Translate were used ubiquitously, given their high utilization overall, and used consistently through whatever software that the document came on, to try and maintain some sort of consistency. But that is a major limitation. The translations might be biased to use different phrasing and or different terms, and therefore sort of obstruct the findings in whichever direction that may be. Now the next stage, which is also a limitation of the research, is analyzing and understanding this research as what governments are doing in order to assess safety, and thus allow public use of these devices, but it doesn't necessarily show us what researchers are measuring overall, because they might actually be using these qualitative measures, neuropsychological measures, neuropsychiatric, psychiatric overall, but just not necessarily needing to submit them for regulatory evaluation. And this is, I think, a good next step would be to analyze what it is that these researchers are publishing, and understanding what they're finding and what they're prioritizing their findings as. Now, to contextualize the results a bit further, I think it's important to continue the discussion, both the findings and that qualitative measurements are under prioritized, but also to understand these research measures as tending to be in randomized control trial formats that are trying to get as many subjects as they can and try and control from it as many variables as possible, which gives great validity and safety, but might miss out on when these populations are small, especially with as we get some more niche neurologic and psychiatric conditions for treatment, it'll be more difficult. And thus an ongoing discussion and debate has been around randomized controlled trials versus more N of 1 studies like the personalized medicine, which I've published on before. Which ones should be prioritized going forward? But this adds to that discussion by showing how qualitative measures are de-emphasized and might need to be emphasized in the future if N of 1 trials are utilized. Overall, that summarizes my research in regards to closed-loop deep brain stimulation as a personalized treatment and global standards. I'd like to highlight my works cited. Please feel free to find that on my poster, and I'd like to acknowledge those who have supported me, in particular the School of Humanities and Department of Philosophy and Gender Studies, a previous co-author, Dr. Frederick Gilbert, for his ongoing supervision through this master's, as well as Dr. Richard. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out during the virtual presentation. And if you don't get a chance, please feel free to email me. I look forward to talking with this and answering any questions you might have regarding my findings and any other details you'd like to explore. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference.